It happened in a place we've all been, a local grocery store, on a regular Thursday afternoon. Fluorescent lights, the soft beep of scanned items, and the quiet shuffle of carts moving down narrow aisles. There was nothing out of the ordinary that day, until one moment shattered that calm. A man in his mid-30s, phone in hand, visibly agitated, stepped out of line and shoved past an elderly woman, nearly knocking her down.
People gasped.
Some froze. But one man didn't. One man stepped forward, and what he did next has gone viral across the internet, sparking debates on justice, respect, and whether standing up for others is still something we do in America. In this video, you're going to find out exactly who that man was, why he did what he did, and the twist that left every witness, and now millions of viewers, speechless. If you're here looking for the full story behind the viral headline, "Man Pushes Elderly Woman in Grocery Line," Off-Duty Cop Teaches Him a Lesson, stay with me, because you're about to hear every single detail, from the first shove to the final showdown. And trust me, this isn't just a story about a line at the grocery store. It's about a deeper line being crossed in society, and how one moment can expose everything that's wrong, or everything that still gives us hope. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever seen something happen, something clearly wrong, but you didn't know whether to step in or stay silent? That awkward tension where your heart races and your conscience tugs at you, but you hesitate, unsure if someone else will act first? That's exactly where dozens of bystanders found themselves that day. Because it's not just about the act, it's about how we respond to it. And if you're someone who believes respect should be earned but also given, that our elders deserve dignity, and that courage still exists even when nobody's watching, then you're going to want to hear this to the very end. We live in a time where everything is caught on camera, yet most of the time, people record injustice without actually doing anything to stop it. They share it, comment on it, maybe go viral for a day. But what happens when someone not only steps in, but knows exactly how to step in? That's what makes this story so different. What nobody at that grocery store knew was that the man who stepped forward wasn't just any shopper. He wasn't just a good Samaritan. He was an off-duty cop with a history of de-escalating high-stakes situations, and that day, his instincts kicked in before anyone even processed what had happened. But before we get to that critical moment, before we get to the lesson that left an entitled bully completely stunned, let's take a moment to get to know the people involved. Because this wasn't just a quick incident and a viral video. This was a story rooted in pain, perspective, and a past none of the onlookers could see. And once you understand the backgrounds of the man who pushed, the woman who was shoved, and the off-duty cop who intervened, you'll see just how powerful this story really is. Picture this. You're standing in line at your neighborhood grocery store. It's late afternoon, and the store is busy, but not chaotic. In front of you is an elderly woman, maybe late 70s, thin, silver curls tucked behind her ears, pushing a cart filled with modest groceries. Milk, eggs, a small bouquet of daisies. The kind of woman who still pays in cash and probably clipped coupons that morning. You notice her smile faintly at the cashier. Then, behind you, a man's voice cuts through the hum of the store. He's pacing, cursing under his breath, clearly impatient. He mutters something about people wasting time, and the moment he sees an opening, he takes it. He doesn't just cut the line. He uses his arm to shove right past the elderly woman, pushing her cart and nearly sending her off balance. That's when the gasps start. That's when phones go up. And that's when a hand grabs his shoulder, and everything changes. In this video, you're going to meet Officer David Ruiz, the off-duty cop who didn't just confront the man, but read the situation like a chess master. David didn't yell. He didn't shove back. What he did instead was so calculated, so calm. It turned the entire confrontation into something you'll never forget. But there's a reason David reacted the way he did, and it has everything to do with a moment from his past that we'll uncover later in this story. His background, his training, and a very personal memory all played a part in what unfolded next. And as for the man who did the shoving, his name is Blake. And what you'll learn about Blake's mindset, his entitlement, and the breaking point that led him to act out, well, it's going to hit closer to home than you might expect. But this story isn't just about the confrontation. It's about the way society reacts when disrespect meets authority. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let bullying slide, whether it's at a school, a workplace, or in a checkout line. It's about setting a precedent because what happened in that store didn't just teach one man a lesson. It sent a message to everyone watching, both in person and now online. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why people are calling Officer Ruiz a hero, not for being a cop, but for being the kind of person who uses authority with humility, power with grace, and strength not to dominate, but to protect. Now, let's talk about the crowd. Because this story wouldn't be complete without the people who witnessed it. You might be wondering, why didn't anyone else step in? Why did they just watch, record, or look away? Well, here's something most people don't realize. We're psychologically wired to hesitate in group settings. It's called the bystander effect. The larger the group, the less likely anyone is to act. And in that frozen moment, as the elderly woman stumbled and the man stormed forward, everyone was waiting for someone else to do something. But not David. And that's why this story stands out in a sea of headlines. Because one man chose action over apathy, and it changed everything. As we peel back the layers of this story, you're going to see how a single act of courage triggered a ripple effect from inside the store to social media feeds across the country. You'll hear from a store manager who thought he was about to witness a fight, from the woman's daughter who arrived minutes later in tears, and from people online who said this story reminded them of what America used to stand for. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there's a twist, something you probably wouldn't expect, something about the man who did the shoving that might make you feel something other than just anger. Because here's the truth, stories like this aren't just about good guys and bad guys. They're about context. They're about the choices we make when no one expects us to act. And they're about how one small, everyday moment can reveal the very best and worst of who we are. So, if you're the kind of person who believes real courage still exists, who wants to know what really happened after the camera stopped rolling, and who's curious about how justice can sometimes come from the most unexpected places, this story is for you. And I promise, by the end, you'll walk away not only knowing the full truth behind that viral video, but with a new sense of how powerful one person's decision can be. Now, take a breath. Because what happened next, right after Officer Ruiz placed his hand on Blake's shoulder, is the part no one saw coming. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was watching. But the real lesson? That was just about to begin. At first glance, Blake didn't seem like someone who would snap in public. Tall, clean-shaven, with a pair of designer sunglasses perched on his head and a smartwatch that pinged every few minutes, he gave off the impression of someone who had it together, someone successful, maybe even respected in his own circles. That day, he was wearing a sleek blazer over a crisp white tee, the kind of outfit you don't throw on unless you're headed to a meeting or trying to impress someone. But appearances, as always, are deceiving. Because behind the image was a man under enormous pressure, a pressure that had been building silently for weeks, possibly months. And when he stepped into that grocery store, all it took was one moment, one delay, one perceived inconvenience, for everything to crack wide open. The thing is, people around Blake had already begun to notice a change. He wasn't sleeping. He'd been canceling plans, dodging calls, spending long hours holed up in his apartment even on weekends. To outsiders, it looked like burnout. To those closer, like his sister, Megan, or his friend Travis who worked with him at the tech startup he helped co-found, it felt like something deeper. Something darker. He wasn't just exhausted. He was unraveling. But here's where things start to twist. Because while Blake's behavior at the store sparked outrage, those who knew him claimed it was out of character. Megan later told a reporter that he was always fiercely protective of their late grandmother, that he once jumped into traffic to retrieve her runaway dog, that he'd get choked up during commercials featuring veterans or children in need. "He's not a monster," she said, almost pleading. "He's just not himself lately." And that's when investigators started to dig deeper, realizing this wasn't a simple case of public aggression. There was a reason Blake was at that store. There was a reason he lashed out that day, why that specific moment triggered something explosive. And as we peel back the layers of his life, we begin to see how tangled and fragile things really were. Just 2 nights earlier, Blake had been seen arguing with someone in the parking lot of a high-end restaurant downtown. Witnesses claimed he looked cornered, tense, like he was trying to get away from the conversation. But the other person?
Calm.
In control. Someone nobody recognized, but someone Blake clearly feared. Now, that's where the story begins to split. Some believe that person in the parking lot was connected to Blake's work. A high-stakes contract had recently gone sideways, costing his startup hundreds of thousands of dollars and triggering a lawsuit from a silent partner whose identity was still under wraps. Others suspect it had more to do with Blake's personal life. Rumors had swirled that his recent breakup with a woman named Lacey, an attorney with connections to some very influential people, had left him emotionally wrecked. Lacey, known for her icy composure and political family ties, refused to comment when contacted, but her silence only added fuel to the fire. Was Blake being threatened? Manipulated? Or was he simply spiraling out from a series of self-inflicted wounds? That's where the uncertainty starts to take shape, because while most viewers saw an entitled man push a defenseless woman, the truth behind that push is anything but simple. And what about Officer Ruiz? His presence that day wasn't purely coincidental. Though he was off duty, he wasn't there just to buy bread and eggs. He'd been following a personal lead, one that connected to an ongoing investigation involving tech fraud, shell companies, and a string of suspicious incidents that had recently popped up in nearby counties. Ruiz wasn't in uniform, but his instincts were sharp. He'd noticed Blake pacing outside the store before entering. The way Blake looked over his shoulder, the way he kept checking his phone. Something was off. Ruiz knew the signs: paranoia, agitation, the kind of body language that screamed trouble before it happened. And when Blake made his move in the line, Ruiz didn't just react physically. He was already analyzing the situation from a law enforcement perspective. That's why he stepped in not with aggression, but with authority layered in calm. And once he had Blake under control, once the crowd started to ease and the phones went down, Ruiz made a decision that surprised even the store staff. He didn't immediately arrest Blake. Instead, he asked him a question, one that stunned the man into silence. "Is someone following you?" he said. Blake didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told Ruiz everything he needed to know. From that moment forward, the story evolved into something far more complex. Ruiz contacted the local precinct, not just to report the incident, but to pull some strings. He needed surveillance footage, not just from the grocery store but from traffic cams and surrounding businesses. Because if Blake was being watched or coerced, this wasn't just a case of bad behavior. It was potentially part of a much larger operation, something with layers and secrets still unfolding. And that's when viewers began to speculate. Was Blake a pawn in a bigger game? Could his outburst have been triggered not by entitlement, but by fear? And if so, who was pulling the strings? The grocery store itself became a temporary hotspot for conspiracy theorists and TikTok sleuths. Videos with millions of views broke down every angle of the viral clip, analyzing the body language of each person in the frame. A woman in a blue scarf seen in the background became a person of interest when multiple commenters claimed they saw her in 2 other viral confrontations weeks earlier. A man with sunglasses in aisle 6 seemed to walk away just before Blake entered the checkout line, but no one could identify him. Some even speculated that the whole event had been staged, though this was quickly debunked by store security logs and employee testimony. Still, the theories didn't stop. Because people wanted answers, not just about Blake, but about why this story, out of all the thousands of viral clips online, struck such a nerve across the country. Part of it, undoubtedly, is timing. With tensions high across the U.S., from rising public anger to ongoing debates about civility and mental health, this moment became a lightning rod. It forced people to confront uncomfortable questions. Do we rush to judge, or do we look deeper? Is bad behavior always a reflection of bad character, or can it sometimes be a desperate cry for help? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of society are we becoming if the elderly can be pushed aside without consequence? And so, as this story continues to unfold, one thing remains painfully clear. This wasn't just about a man losing his temper. It was about what that loss revealed, about him, about us, and about the line between justice and judgment. But even now, new pieces of the puzzle are coming to light. The silent partner from the failed contract? Recently surfaced bank records suggest it might be someone with ties to offshore accounts and political lobbying firms. The mystery person from the restaurant parking lot? A blurry license plate caught on camera hints at a connection to a larger web of financial manipulation. And as for Blake, he hasn't been seen publicly since the incident. Some say he's in a private facility. Others believe he's cooperating with federal investigators. But no one knows for sure. And Officer Ruiz? He's gone quiet too, choosing to stay out of the media, fueling even more speculation about what else he might have uncovered. What you've seen so far is just the surface. Beneath it is a story about pressure, power, protection, and how sometimes a viral moment is just the first breadcrumb in a trail that leads to something much bigger. Something that hasn't fully come to light yet. As days passed and the online storm around the incident refused to settle, something strange began to happen. Pieces of the story that once felt solid started to shift, blur, even disappear. It began quietly, almost as if no one was supposed to notice. A key video clip from the store's surveillance system, one that showed the exact moment Blake entered the grocery aisle and appeared to scan the crowd before approaching the checkout, was suddenly missing from the footage package provided to local investigators. The manager swore it had been part of the original download. A staff member even recalled seeing it during the initial review with Officer Ruiz. But when Ruiz returned for a second look, the file was gone. Corrupted, the IT technician claimed. Just a glitch. No backup. Nothing retrievable. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. And that's when Ruiz knew something bigger was going on. Someone didn't want that clip to be seen. That footage might have shown who Blake was looking at. Or who was watching him. Then came the warning. It wasn't dramatic. No phone call in the middle of the night. No shadowy figure lurking outside Ruiz's home. It was a simple envelope, unmarked, slid under his windshield wiper while he was at the precinct. Inside, a folded sheet of paper with one sentence scrawled in red ink. "Let it go, detective. This is not your case anymore." No signature. No fingerprints. Just those 8 chilling words. Ruiz showed it to his captain, but the reaction was muted, cautious. Too cautious. He was told to stand down, reminded that he was off duty during the incident and that it was being handled by another team now. "You did your part. Now it's someone else's turn," his superior said. But Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to bury the truth. And worse, he had a growing suspicion that someone inside the department might be involved. Meanwhile, Blake's sister Megan tried to get answers of her own, contacting a local journalist who had been following the story from day one. The reporter, Sam Connors, was sharp, an independent voice who didn't answer to corporate networks or City Hall. When Megan met him, she brought a flash drive with screenshots of text messages Blake had sent her in the days leading up to the incident. They were fragmented, vague, but laced with paranoia. One message read, "They're in the system. I don't know who to trust." Another simply said, "If anything happens, check Dad's old records." At first, Sam dismissed them as the ramblings of someone under immense stress. But after Blake vanished from public view and the footage from the grocery store started disappearing, Sam realized this wasn't just stress, it was survival. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Ruiz received a call from a retired detective named Lionel Marks, a former mentor, long since off the force after a controversial internal investigation involving data leaks and unauthorized surveillance. Ruiz hadn't spoken to him in years. But Marks had been watching the story unfold and said 3 words that hit Ruiz like a punch to the chest. "It's happening again." When pressed, Marks revealed a case from 15 years earlier, nearly identical. A young entrepreneur, well-connected, snapped in public at a stranger in what seemed like an unprovoked outburst. That man later disappeared, officially labeled as having relocated for treatment. But years later, Marks found connections between the outburst and a larger scheme involving government-backed tech contracts, falsified identities, and an illegal behavioral experiment carried out through corporate shell companies. They were testing responses to pressure, paranoia, trauma, Marks said. And those who failed were disappeared. Ruiz didn't want to believe it. But the more he looked into it, the more the patterns seemed to repeat. Even Sam the journalist began to notice odd behavior. A source who had promised documents related to Blake's failed contract went completely off the grid. No return calls. Social media wiped. Email accounts deactivated. When Sam stopped by the source's apartment, the building manager claimed she'd moved out days earlier, though neighbors swore they saw her just the night before. Then, Sam's car was broken into. Nothing taken, but the glove box was wide open and his backup recorder was gone. These weren't random acts. They were precise, controlled, deliberate. Someone was erasing footprints before the real chase even began. The deeper everyone dug, the more tangled things became. Blake's old startup? Turns out it was partially funded by a venture capital firm tied to a former federal contractor. That same contractor was recently investigated for misappropriating AI surveillance funds, yet the case was dropped with no public explanation. And then, there's the most unsettling discovery. Blake's father, who died when Blake was a teenager, once worked on classified government projects involving psychological conditioning. His employment records were sealed, but a single line in a declassified file remained. Asset transferred for use in civilian stress modeling, program code, EchoVeil. What was EchoVeil? Why did Blake mention his father's records before disappearing? And why does everything about this case, from the viral moment to the missing footage and even the cryptic warnings, feel less like a meltdown and more like a trap? Just when Ruiz thought he had a new lead, something happened that threw everything into chaos. Megan, desperate to understand her brother's messages, tried to access their father's storage unit. She remembered the passcode, still burned into her memory from childhood road trips. But when she got there, the lock had been changed, and the facility claimed the account had been closed a week ago. By who? No one could say. They had no record of her visit, no proof the unit ever existed. But Megan had the old key. She held it in her hand. That unit was real, and someone didn't want her to open it. Now the questions are multiplying. Who is covering up the truth? Is Blake a victim or a threat? And what secrets from his family's past are worth silencing entire investigations over? And just when Ruiz begins to map out the connections, his computer locks up. Files gone. Backup drives wiped. A single new folder sits on his desktop, titled in all caps, "Stop." Inside it, one image loads, a grainy still frame of Ruiz, staring up at the grocery store camera, moments before the incident. Only this time, he's not alone in the picture. There's a figure behind him, unblurred, staring directly into the lens. And Ruiz knows, without a doubt, he's seen that face before. The image of the mysterious figure staring into the lens haunted Ruiz. Every waking moment, he found himself staring at that photo, unable to shake the unease creeping through his thoughts. He knew he had seen that face before, somewhere, in the far recesses of his memory. It wasn't just a random stranger caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a person who had been connected to his past, someone who knew too much. But before he could connect the dots, something else emerged, pulling him deeper into a web he couldn't escape. It came in the form of a phone call to his ex-wife, Jamie. She was far removed from his work now, living in a quiet neighborhood with their teenage son, Leo, far from the noise of his career. But that didn't stop the darkness from following. Jamie had been getting strange calls, anonymous and brief, just like the message Ruiz had received. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, she'd been living in a world of uncertainty since their divorce. But when Ruiz called to check in on her voice shook. "I got another one, Andy," she whispered, her words barely audible over the phone. This time, they didn't leave a message, but I could tell, whoever it was, they were watching me. Watching us. Ruiz's heart stopped. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting him. They were reaching out to everyone connected to his life, every friend, every loved one. And now it was his son Leo who would be next. As Ruiz pieced together the fragments of his life, another revelation surfaced, further entangling him in a chaotic spiral. The records of Blake's father, once sealed, were suddenly accessible through a hidden network Ruiz had discovered in a cyber hacker's encrypted files. What he found inside these documents made his blood run cold. Blake's father, Gregory Davis, had been a key player in a covert government program that ran in parallel with the now infamous Echo Veil project. But this new program wasn't just about psychological stress experiments. No, it was far darker. They were testing how far ordinary civilians could be pushed before they completely broke down, using carefully orchestrated environmental pressures, surveillance tactics, and misinformation. In short, they had engineered the perfect storm for manipulation, preying on people's fears and insecurities, feeding into paranoia and distrust. What Ruiz didn't expect, however, was to uncover a connection between Gregory Davis and a shadowy figure from his own past. A man named Victor Hollis. Ruiz had crossed paths with Hollis during his early days on the force, a high-ranking contractor involved in private security operations that often blurred the lines of legality. He had always suspected Hollis was involved in something shady, but there was never enough evidence to take him down. The startling realization was this: Hollis wasn't just some peripheral figure. He was deeply embedded in the very system that Ruiz had once unknowingly worked for. Hollis was connected to Echo Veil. He was connected to Blake's father. And now it seemed like he was connected to Ruiz. The trail of corruption was growing longer by the day. The more Ruiz uncovered, the more dangerous it became. Just as he began to feel the weight of the conspiracy settling in his chest, another unexpected obstacle appeared. His partner, Detective Rojas, had begun to act strange. She was a seasoned investigator, solid and reliable, someone Ruiz had trusted for years. But recently, her behavior had changed. She had become distant, evasive, and, worst of all, defensive. When Ruiz confronted her about the missing footage, she brushed him off, saying it wasn't worth pursuing anymore. "Let the new team handle it," she insisted, her eyes darting nervously to the side. Something was off, and Ruiz couldn't ignore it. He decided to dig into Rojas's background, looking for any signs of her connection to this growing web of lies. It wasn't long before he found something unsettling. Rojas had once been involved in a high-profile investigation that was mysteriously dropped, with no explanation given. The case? A government contractor suspected of manipulating public opinion through media and covert operations. The more Ruiz thought about it, the more he realized that Rojas might know far more than she was letting on. The question now wasn't just whether she was hiding something, it was what she was hiding. Had she been compromised by Hollis, or was she part of the larger conspiracy all along? As the days wore on, Ruiz began to notice another disturbing pattern. People close to the case, people he had trusted, were slowly being silenced. Journalists who had pursued leads were either quitting the story or disappearing altogether. Investigators on the case had suddenly transferred to different departments. And the more Ruiz pushed, the more walls seemed to go up around him. No one would talk. No one would help. The pressure was mounting, and Ruiz felt the walls closing in. But what disturbed him most was the subtle shift in Blake's sister, Megan. At first, she had been eager to work with Ruiz, desperate to find her brother. But recently, her attitude had changed. She seemed more withdrawn, more guarded. When Ruiz pressed her about the new information they were uncovering, she began to pull back, becoming increasingly defensive. Was it possible that she had known more about her brother's involvement in this than she had let on? Or was there a larger game at play, one in which Megan was being manipulated without even realizing it? Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were just out of reach. The deeper he went, the more convoluted the situation became. The message on the envelope had been clear: let it go. But Ruiz couldn't. He knew he was on the verge of discovering something big, something that would shake the very foundations of a case. The pieces were starting to fit together, but with each revelation came even more questions, more suspects, and more danger. Ruiz had to figure out who was pulling the strings before it was too late. But the question remained: who could he trust? Every step forward felt like a step deeper into the unknown. And just when Ruiz thought he had finally uncovered the truth, something unexpected happened. Megan disappeared. Just like Blake. No phone call. No warning. She was gone, and the only clue left behind was a single, haunting message sent from her phone. "I've seen the truth. It's too late." Ruiz stood in the dimly lit parking garage, his hand gripping the edge of his car door as he scanned the area. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. It had started with a few odd occurrences, cars that seemed to be parked a little too long, figures lingering in the shadows. But now, it was relentless. Each time he turned a corner, he felt eyes on him, like invisible hands tightening around his throat, squeezing the life out of his every move. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was reality. He was being followed. Earlier that day, he had tried to reach Megan. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The messages he had left were unreturned, and there was no word from her. She had disappeared just like Blake. His mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Had she found the truth, like she claimed, only to be silenced? Had she become another casualty in this twisted game? Or worse, was she in the same place Blake was now? Trapped somewhere, hidden away by those who would stop at nothing to keep the secrets buried? Ruiz could feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. The more people he trusted, the more he realized they were not who they seemed to be. And now it was his own life on the line. He needed answers, but the answers came at a cost. He couldn't go back. The walls were closing in, and every lead he chased only led him deeper into a maze with no way out. As he slid into the driver's seat, his phone buzzed. Ruiz froze. The number was unknown, but the message was clear. Stop looking, or you'll be next. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in a long while, fear gripped him like a vice. He had been warned before by the anonymous messages, by the cryptic notes, but this felt different. This was a direct threat. Whoever was behind this was not just watching him anymore. They were actively hunting him. He slammed the car door shut, his mind racing. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to stay one step ahead. But there was no escaping it. The stakes had just escalated. His pursuit of the truth had put him in the crosshairs of something far darker than he could have ever imagined. He had thought he was uncovering a hidden conspiracy, but now it felt more like he was being toyed with, dragged deeper into a game with no escape. The night grew colder as Ruiz drove through the empty streets. His headlights illuminated the winding road ahead, but it felt like the darkness was closing in faster than he could outrun it. Every car that passed, every shadow that flickered, made his pulse spike. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Someone was out there, following him. But who?
And why?
Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. Faint, but distinct. A sound from the back seat. Ruiz's breath caught in his throat, and he whipped his head to the rear-view mirror. There was nothing there, but the sound remained, echoing in his mind, a whisper of something just beyond his reach. His heart raced as he pressed the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as he swerved onto the next street. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and panic began to claw at the edges of his mind. He needed to stop, to think, but his instincts told him to keep going. He couldn't stay in one place for too long, not with someone so close, not when he had no idea who he could trust anymore. His phone buzzed again, the message on the screen sending a chill down his spine. "We know where you are." His stomach turned, the world spinning as he fought to stay calm. Every part of him screamed to drive faster, to find somewhere safe, but he knew deep down that there was no safe anymore. The people behind this, whether it was Hollis, Rojas, or someone else entirely, had been in control from the beginning. And now they were pulling the strings, pushing Ruiz further into the corner. He was being watched. He was being hunted. And there was nowhere to run. A flash of movement caught his eye, a figure standing on the side of the road, a silhouette against the dim streetlights. Ruiz slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, his breath coming in short bursts. He knew he had seen that person before, only it was impossible. The figure standing there, watching him, was too familiar. It was Jamie. But that couldn't be. She was hours away, safe at home with their son. This wasn't her. "Get out of the car, Ruiz." A voice from the shadows called out, a low, menacing tone that made Ruiz's blood run cold.
Now.
His mind reeled, and for the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. The figure, whoever it was right. He couldn't keep running. They had him. The voice was familiar, but it didn't belong to Jamie. Ruiz's hand shot to the door handle, but before he could make a move, the figure stepped into the beam of his headlights. His eyes widened in shock. It wasn't just someone from his past, it was Rojas. The detective stood there, her face grim, her eyes hard with a coldness Ruiz had never seen before. She wasn't just a colleague anymore. She was a threat. And what she said next sent a ripple of dread through him. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, Ruiz. You don't know who's watching or how far this goes. You should have stopped before it was too late. In an instant, Ruiz realized the terrifying truth. He had been living in the eye of a storm, and now, the storm was closing in. There was no way out. No one was safe. His entire world had just turned upside down, and now, there was no telling who he could trust. Rojas wasn't the ally he thought she was. She was part of something much larger, and Ruiz was standing at the center of it, a pawn in a game he hadn't even begun to understand. But one thing was clear, whoever had orchestrated all of this wasn't just out to silence him. They wanted him broken. They wanted him to understand that there was no escape, no truth left to uncover. And now, Ruiz had to make a choice: keep digging and risk losing everything, or walk away and let those who had already disappeared become the final casualties in a war he hadn't even known was happening. There was no right answer, only a growing sense of dread that made him realize, more than ever, just how deeply he was entangled in a darkness he couldn't escape. Just as Ruiz thought he had everything under control, the reality of the situation began to unravel in the most unexpected way. The sense of urgency that had gripped him earlier began to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. As he parked in the secluded spot he'd chosen, far from prying eyes, he felt the weight of the flash drive in his jacket pocket. The truth was within his reach, but something in the pit of his stomach told him that there was still more to the story than he had uncovered. His phone buzzed again, a new message appearing on the screen. This time, it wasn't from an anonymous number. It was from someone he thought he could trust, someone whose allegiance he had never questioned. Ruiz, we need to talk. I know you think you're on the right track, but you're missing something big. Don't trust anyone, not even me.
I'm sorry.
It was from Jamie. The words hit him like a punch to the gut, his mind reeling as he tried to make sense of what he was reading. The sudden realization that someone he had considered an ally might be playing both sides sent a chill down his spine. Had Jamie been manipulating him from the start? Or had something changed recently that caused them to turn on him? There were too many unanswered questions. Ruiz quickly scanned the message again, trying to find a hidden meaning, but there was nothing more, just that cryptic warning. He stared at the screen for a moment longer, unsure of what to do next. But before he could fully process the gravity of Jamie's message, another thought struck him: Megan. She had been at the center of it all, her involvement seeming like an unfortunate coincidence. But what if it wasn't? What if she had known more than she let on, played a part in this whole thing, and had been manipulating him too? Everything he thought he knew was now in question, and the line between friend and foe had become blurred. As Ruiz paced around his car, frustration bubbling inside him, his phone buzzed again. This time it was a voice message. His heart skipped as he hit play. Ruiz, the voice was unmistakable. Rojas. I know you've got the flash drive. You think it's the key to everything, but you're so far off, you wouldn't even recognize the truth if it slapped you in the face. There's more to this than what you've seen. Don't be so quick to trust what's in front of you. The real players are still out there. And I'm not who you think I am. The message ended abruptly, leaving Ruiz frozen in place. Rojas. It had been easy to assume Rojas was just a pawn in this game, another player in the conspiracy that Ruiz was determined to uncover. But this revelation, this shocking confession, completely turned that idea on its head. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle that had seemed so clear were scattered, disjointed, and every connection he thought he had made now seemed unreliable. Ruiz's mind raced. If Rojas wasn't who he appeared to be, then who had he been working for? Who had been pulling the strings all along? And what about Jamie? Could they have been working together all along? Or was it someone else entirely who had been manipulating them both? His hands trembled as he scrolled through his contacts, his mind frantic for answers. But there were no easy answers. No clear path forward. Then, as if the universe was conspiring to push him further down this rabbit hole, Ruiz heard the sound of tires on gravel. Someone was approaching. Panic surged through him as he quickly shoved the phone back in his pocket, scanning his surroundings for any sign of danger. But when the figure emerged from the shadows, Ruiz's breath caught in his throat. It was someone he hadn't expected to see, someone who had been nowhere near the chaos until now, someone he thought had been completely out of the picture. It was Megan. Her eyes met his, and for a split second, there was nothing but silence between them. Then she spoke, her voice low and steady, as if nothing had changed. "You're too late," she said, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. The game has already changed. Ruiz's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. She knew more than she had let on, and somehow, she was connected to everything in ways he hadn't yet realized. Had she been playing him all along? Or was there something even darker at play here? He wanted answers, needed them, but the more he uncovered, the more questions emerged. Megan took a step forward, her eyes flickering toward the flash drive in his pocket. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? You think that piece of data is going to solve everything. But what if I told you that drive isn't the answer? What if I told you it's just a distraction?" A cold shiver ran down Ruiz's spine as the magnitude of her words hit him. What had he missed? What was he not seeing? The pieces of the puzzle were shifting yet again, and Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger, far more dangerous game. The truth was slipping through his fingers, and the more he tried to hold on, the further it seemed to pull away. As Megan turned to leave, Ruiz was left standing there, consumed by the uncertainty that now enveloped him. The story he thought he was solving, everything he had believed in, was being torn apart piece by piece. The people he had trusted, the allies he thought he had, were all part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. And with every twist, the stakes grew higher, the danger more imminent. The truth was still out there, but it was becoming more elusive by the second. And Ruiz was no closer to finding it than he had been when this all began. Ruiz sat alone in his car, the engine humming softly, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a force that made his knuckles white. The weight of the decision that lay before him was crushing, suffocating, and yet, it was all he could think about. Rojas's words replayed in his mind, each syllable sinking deeper into his chest, a cold reminder of the mess he had gotten himself into. You should have stopped before it was too late. She had been right in some ways. This wasn't just about uncovering a conspiracy anymore. It was about survival, and the stakes had never been higher. He couldn't ignore the darkness that was closing in around him, but with every step he took toward the truth, it felt like he was digging his own grave. The flashing images of Blake's disappearance, Megan's cryptic messages, and now Rojas's cold, warning words had all twisted together into something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. But it wasn't just the danger he was facing now, it was the personal betrayal that he was only beginning to comprehend. Ruiz had trusted Rojas. They had worked together for years, shared cases, confided in each other. And yet, here she was, standing on the other side of this web of deceit, her role far darker than he ever could have imagined. Now, Ruiz had a choice. The gravity of it all crushed him. He could keep digging, expose whatever corruption was festering beneath the surface, but in doing so, he would be risking not only his life, but the lives of those closest to him. His thoughts turned to Jamie. Could he really put her and their son in harm's way for the sake of a truth that might destroy them all? Could he live with himself knowing that his pursuit of justice might cost him everything? Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to put this behind him, to keep his family safe, but the truth gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. Then the message came through. The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any threat he had received so far. Meet me, if you want your son to be safe. The text was unsigned, no hint of who was behind it, but Ruiz didn't need a name to know that this wasn't a bluff. His heart raced as the tension in his chest built, a knot of dread tightening with every passing second. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the ones he loved. They were in danger, and he had no way of knowing who was pulling the strings or how far the reach of this sinister force extended. The ultimatum was clear: his son's safety or the truth. He couldn't have both. Ruiz knew what he had to do. His mind raced as he sat there, staring out into the night. He could feel the weight of it all: Jamie, their son, the life they had built. Could he really risk everything for a handful of answers? Was it worth it to expose the darkness, only to see it destroy the people he loved most? But the more he thought about it, the more it became clear that he had no choice. The truth had already cost too much. If he didn't act now, if he didn't push forward, he would live the rest of his life knowing that he had abandoned those who had already suffered. They had paid the price. Blake, Megan, the countless others who had disappeared or been silenced, they had given everything to a cause they believed in, and Ruiz couldn't let their deaths be in vain. But just as the decision solidified in his mind, his phone buzzed again. This time a call. Ruiz's heart skipped a beat as the name on the screen flashed: Jamie. He hesitated before answering, his breath shallow as he pressed the phone to his ear. Her voice came through, frantic, almost breathless, like she had been running, like she was out of breath from fear. "Ruiz, listen to me," she said, her voice breaking through the noise. "I know what's going on. I know what you've been trying to uncover. But you need to stop. You need to trust me, okay? They're watching us. They're everywhere. They know about you, they know about Blake, and they know about us. You have to leave. Now." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His head spun as he tried to make sense of what she was saying. "Jamie, what are you talking about? Who's watching us? What do you mean they know about Blake?" She paused, and for a moment, the silence felt heavier than the entire conversation. "You don't understand, Ruiz. It's not just the case. It's not just Rojas or the people you're after. They've been pulling the strings from the beginning, and I've been working with them all along. I've been trying to protect you, to protect us, but if you keep going, if you keep digging, they'll kill us. They'll kill our son." Ruiz's mind went blank. The words hit him like 1,000 knives all at once. Jamie, the woman he had trusted with everything, the mother of his child, had been working with the very people who had been orchestrating all of this? Was she really the ally he thought she was? Or had he been blind to the truth the entire time? His pulse pounded in his ears as he struggled to piece together the shattered fragments of the conversation. You've been working with them?" His voice was barely a whisper, disbelief laced with growing anger. "How long? Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," Jamie whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I couldn't risk losing you, Ruiz. But now it's too late. They've already found us, and if you don't stop, we're all dead. You have to trust me. Please." The phone went dead. Ruiz's heart pounded as he sat frozen, the world spinning around him. He was paralyzed by the weight of what he had just learned. Jamie had been working with the people he thought were his enemies. And now, she was telling him to stop, to walk away from everything he had been fighting for. But could he really trust her? Could he trust anyone anymore? The ultimatum was more real than ever. He had to make a choice, one that would decide not only his future, but that of his family. Could he walk away and live with the knowledge that he let corruption win? Or did he have the courage to face the truth, no matter the cost? The tension in the air was unbearable, the weight of the decision crushing him. There was no way out, no easy path. Every move he made, every person he trusted, brought him one step closer to a cliff with no safety net below. And in that moment, Ruiz knew one thing for sure. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The moment Ruiz hung up the phone, he felt a chill run down his spine. He had barely processed Jamie's betrayal when he noticed something that made his heart drop: his rearview mirror. Someone was following him. The unmistakable glare of headlights reflected off his mirror, and he could see the dark silhouette of a car keeping a safe but steady distance. A rush of panic surged through him, and his grip on the steering wheel tightened to the point where his hands ached. It was no longer just about his family's safety, it was about his own survival. He had been so close to unraveling the conspiracy, to exposing the corruption that had poisoned everything, but now the walls were closing in faster than he could react. The night felt suffocating, the air thick with tension, as though everything he had been trying to uncover was about to swallow him whole. But it wasn't just the car behind him that unsettled him, it was everything that had led up to this moment. The connections, the clues, the names he thought he could trust, all seemed to be falling apart. Rojas had warned him, but even she had been part of something far bigger than he could ever have imagined. He had suspected corruption, but what if it was much more than just the people he had been investigating? What if they were only pawns in a far grander scheme, a vast web of deceit that stretched across multiple layers of power? Every person he had leaned on, every step he had taken, had been a misstep, a false lead. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a message from Jamie. It was an anonymous text, the kind that chilled you to your core. "You're not the only one who knows, Ruiz. And if you keep going, you'll lose more than your son." The threat was clear, but what hit hardest was the implication. It wasn't just Jamie, wasn't just Rojas, wasn't just one or two corrupt officials. There was an entire network, a coordinated effort that had been manipulating everything in Ruiz's life, from the people he trusted to the information he thought he had been gathering. They had been following his every move, even before he realized the full scope of what he was up against. And just as Ruiz's mind was racing, trying to put the pieces together, the car behind him accelerated. The sudden surge forward snapped him back to the present, and panic flooded his veins. This wasn't just some random coincidence. He was being pursued, and whoever was in that car was in on something much bigger than he had thought. Ruiz tried to focus, his mind working frantically to come up with a plan, but his heart was pounding in his chest. There was no escape. He had crossed too many lines, dug too deep into the wrong places. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was a call from someone he never expected to hear from. Ruiz. The voice on the other end was familiar, but cold, calculated. It was Megan. She had been one of the first to go missing, her disappearance linked to everything he had been investigating. "I know you're being followed, and I know you're close to the truth. But you need to listen to me. You've been walking right into a trap." His mind whirled, and he felt an overwhelming wave of disbelief. Megan? The same Megan who had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but a trail of confusion and half-answered questions? How was she alive, and why was she calling him now? "Megan? What's going on? Where are you?" Ruiz's voice was shaky, the desperation creeping in. But she didn't answer his question. Instead, she dropped a bombshell that left him speechless. "You need to trust no one, Ruiz. Not even Jamie. She's been compromised. She was never really on your side." Ruiz's heart sank. His entire world felt like it was crumbling around him. Jamie, the one person he had thought he could rely on, was playing a role in this conspiracy too? "What are you talking about? Why would she?" "Megan, tell me what's going on. I'm not getting any of this." Megan's voice softened, but it was laced with a hard edge of fear. "There's something you don't understand. The conspiracy, it's global, Ruiz. It's not just local cops or officials. We're talking about an entire network embedded in governments, corporations, even in the media. They control the narrative. They control everything. And they've been pulling the strings of this case all along." The gravity of her words hit Ruiz like a freight train. He had thought he was uncovering a simple crime, a handful of bad actors pulling the strings in his own city. But this was something far darker, far more insidious. He was no longer dealing with a few corrupt people. He was facing an entire global network that had infiltrated almost every aspect of society. Wait, Ruiz stammered, trying to make sense of it all. "How do you know all of this?" "I've been working with them," Megan admitted, her voice breaking. "I never had a choice. I had to play along if I wanted to survive. But you're right to dig. You're closer than anyone, and they're terrified of you. That's why they're coming after you now. They know you're onto something they can't let get out." Ruiz felt the world around him shift. Everything he had been chasing, everything he thought he knew, had just taken on a completely new meaning. His phone buzzed again, and for the first time, Ruiz was afraid to answer. Megan's warning echoed in his ears. Trust no one. Was this just another lie? Another ploy to stop him from uncovering the truth? He pressed the button to answer anyway. What? He barked into the phone, his voice raw. I'm not the only one who knows, the voice on the other end said, sending a chill through his bones. And if you think you're the only one they're watching, you're dead wrong. Get ready for the biggest reveal of your life. You'll never look at anyone the same way again. The line went dead. Ruiz sat in the car, the weight of what he had just heard sinking in. His mind was spinning, trying to process everything. Someone else knew. Someone else was watching him. And whoever was behind this massive conspiracy was watching his every move. But just when he thought it couldn't get worse, a car screeched to a halt beside him, the figure in the driver's seat leaning out. And for the first time in his life, Ruiz realized that the end of the line was closer than he had ever imagined. The night had become suffocating, the air thick with tension as Ruiz pulled into the desolate parking garage. His pulse was racing, the weight of everything he had learned threatening to crush him. The conspiracy, the threats, the betrayals, it all led to this moment. The time for questions was over. He had to confront the people behind the web of lies that had ruined his life. And yet, as he parked the car and stepped into the cold, echoing silence of the garage, something gnawed at the back of his mind. Was he walking into a trap? Had Megan truly been trying to help him, or was she another pawn in this twisted game? The sound of footsteps echoed from the far corner of the garage. Ruiz tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun in his jacket, but the voice that called out to him stopped him in his tracks. You're too late, Ruiz. The voice was unmistakable, Jamie. He had trusted her, had believed that she was on his side. But now, seeing her standing there, her eyes darkened with something he couldn't quite name, it hit him harder than anything else. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. You don't understand the stakes. This isn't just about you or your son. It's much bigger. Ruiz's heart sank. Jamie, what is all this? What are you involved in? His voice was low, a mix of anger and disbelief, but Jamie didn't flinch. You're trying to fix things that were never meant to be fixed, she said, stepping closer, her silhouette casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. I was assigned to keep you distracted, keep you from uncovering the bigger picture. And now, you've pushed too far. Ruiz's mind raced. Assigned? You've been working for them all along. The betrayal was unbearable, but he had to keep his focus. He wasn't leaving here without the truth. A dark laugh escaped her lips, and her eyes flickered to the far corner of the garage, where a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. Ruiz froze. It was Rojas. She had been part of this all along, the very same person he thought he could trust. But now, standing side by side with Jamie, Rojas' cold expression betrayed everything he had believed. You think you've been following a trail to find the truth, Rojas said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. But the truth is, you've been led in circles. You're nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game. And you're too late to stop it. The weight of the revelation hit Ruiz like a freight train. They had been playing him all along, manipulating him into uncovering information that only fed into their hands. But there was something more, something deeper. The truth, the real conspiracy, was far darker than anything he had imagined. Suddenly, the sound of a door slamming open echoed through the garage, followed by the unmistakable growl of a car engine. Ruiz spun around, his eyes locking onto the black sedan that had been tailing him all night. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a familiar face, Megan. But something was wrong. Her eyes were hollow, her movements stiff, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. She didn't look at Ruiz. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Instead, she walked past him and straight into the heart of the garage where Jamie and Rojas stood, the three of them forming an unholy trinity. Ruiz's blood ran cold. What had happened to her? Had she been playing him too? Megan, no. Ruiz shouted, but her gaze remained vacant, as though she was no longer the person he had once known. The moment hung heavy in the air, and for a second, it seemed like time itself had stopped. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, but Ruiz couldn't bear to face the truth. This wasn't just about his family, his son, or even his life anymore. This was about power, control over something far bigger than he was capable of understanding. This was about a web of corruption that spanned entire governments, corporations, and industries. And it had all led to this moment, this confrontation. Jamie's lips curled into a twisted smile. You're too late. You never understood the plan. The network is already in place. The voices you've heard, the whispers you've followed, they're all part of the design. You're the one who's been played, Ruiz. You always were. Ruiz's breath quickened. He had uncovered pieces of the puzzle, sure. But the full picture? He couldn't see it. Not yet. And now it was too late. There was no escaping it. No way out. As if reading his thoughts, Rojas stepped forward, her voice now dripping with finality. You'll never find them. You'll never stop this. Because we control the narrative now. And you? You're nothing but a ghost. A memory. Just as Ruiz was about to fight back, just as the adrenaline coursed through his veins, something unexpected happened. Megan, the same woman who had been a victim, who had been lost to the conspiracy, suddenly collapsed to her knees in the middle of the garage. The look in her eyes had changed, desperation, terror. She reached out to Ruiz, her voice barely a whisper. Ruiz, they made me. Her voice broke, and with her last ounce of strength, she pulled something from her pocket, a small, encrypted flash drive. She held it up, offering it to him before she slumped to the ground, unconscious. You think you've won? Ruiz spat, the anger rising in his chest. You think you can just walk away from this? Jamie and Rojas exchanged a look, and Ruiz felt the dread claw at his insides. He wasn't prepared for what came next. Actually, Jamie said, her voice calm, we've already won. You're just a casualty of the game. Ruiz's heart dropped as he realized the full weight of the situation. It wasn't just the people in front of him. There were others. So many others. People who had been playing both sides, orchestrating chaos for their own gain. But who was truly behind it all? Who was pulling the strings from the shadows? In that instant, everything shifted. The truth was right in front of him. The key to everything, the final piece of the puzzle, was now in his hands. And with that, a new fire burned in Ruiz's chest. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. Ruiz stood there in the dimly lit garage, the encrypted flash drive heavy in his hand. The world around him seemed to slow as he processed what had just transpired. Megan was unconscious at his feet, the truth still just out of reach, but now more tangible than ever. The conspiracy that had haunted him, the betrayal that had gutted him, all of it had led him to this moment. He looked at Jamie and Rojas, the two people who had orchestrated his downfall. They hadn't expected this turn, this one final move that Ruiz had made. They thought they had him cornered, thought they had won. But they hadn't accounted for one thing, Ruiz's refusal to let go. As the adrenaline slowly ebbed from his veins, a sense of clarity washed over him. He wasn't just fighting for answers anymore, he was fighting for his life, for his son, for the chance to put everything right. But the tension in the air was suffocating. He couldn't just walk away from this. The information on the flash drive was crucial, but he couldn't trust anyone in this room anymore. He had to figure out his next move, quickly. His mind raced with possibilities. What was on that drive? Who could he trust to help him? He glanced at Megan's lifeless form. She had been manipulated, used as a pawn in a game much bigger than herself. But she had also been the one to give him the key to everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. She had been his biggest ally and his greatest threat all along. Ruiz knew he couldn't stick around. The danger was too real. The people who had orchestrated this, those shadowy figures who had pulled the strings from the beginning, were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until their plan was complete. He had to move fast, had to disappear into the shadows before they realized what had happened. The flash drive was his ticket to understanding it all, to exposing the conspiracy, but even more, it was the one thing that could bring them down. The thought of leaving Megan behind stung, but he knew it was the only way. If he stayed any longer, he would be walking into a trap. As Ruiz moved toward the exit, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He froze. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be someone who had figured out his plan? Could it be someone close to him, warning him of the impending danger? He pulled the phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he read the message. It was from an anonymous number, but the words struck him like a lightning bolt. "You think this is over? We're just getting started." Ruiz didn't hesitate. He knew what had to be done. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. He couldn't let the enemy win. But as he reached the exit, he took one last glance back at Megan, still lying on the cold concrete floor. There was a moment of uncertainty, a flicker of doubt in his mind. Had he done the right thing? Was leaving her behind truly the only choice? But there was no time for second-guessing.
He knew what was at stake.
As he drove away, his mind kept circling back to the message. The people behind the conspiracy had played their cards, but Ruiz was about to play his. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and the battle wasn't over, but at least he wasn't alone anymore. He had the truth, and that truth was worth more than any victory. It was a fight he was ready to finish. The flash drive, now locked in the safe place where it could be analyzed, was the key to unraveling everything. But the bigger question still loomed. Who had sent the message? Who had been tracking his every move from the shadows? And what was their next move? As the tension settled in the back of his mind, Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. He had fought for answers, for closure, but the real war was still out there, waiting, lurking, and he would have to face it head-on. But there was one thing Ruiz knew for certain. He wasn't backing down. Not anymore. With the truth in his hands and his resolve stronger than ever, he was prepared to go to war, to fight back against the corruption, to take down the people who thought they were untouchable. The story was far from over. And as the screen faded to black, the final question lingered, hanging in the air like a whispered secret. Who was really behind it all? The audience could feel the weight of the mystery, the unfinished business that remained. And just as they thought they had a grip on the truth, a final twist left them breathless, eager for more. In that moment, the true resolution hadn't yet arrived. It was out there, just beyond the horizon,